All right, so thank you so much for being here, Danae. I'm really excited because I love talking to other startup founders, and especially one that is actually trying to innovate a lot of spaces that would make it better for the world. Like, for example, workplace harassment or anything like that.
Thank you. It's super exciting to be here, and yeah, it's a nice reason to wake up in the morning.
All right, so for the first thing off, can you give me a short introduction about yourself, your background, or some hobbies?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Danae Shell. I'm the co-founder, the CEO of Valla. In terms of my own background, I'm from Tennessee originally, although I don't sound like this anymore. I now live in Scotland, and as you can tell, I've really picked up the accent. And I spent my entire career in the tech industry, first as a software developer, and then later on as a marketer, and now as an executive. And really, in terms of hobbies, I read voraciously. If you've ever seen Storygraph, that is like my favorite thing ever. It's an amazing app. Another female founder. It's like a good alternative to Goodreads. And I basically read constantly, and I also have a small woodland, and so I spend time in my woodland as well, kind of trying to look after it and commune with nature, away from technology, basically.
Great. And a question I always like to ask in my podcast is, if you had all the time in the world, what would you be doing?
Oh my goodness. I think it would be exactly what I am doing, but I wouldn't be focusing so much on fundraising.
Okay.
Well, actually, yeah. If I had all the time in the world, I think I would be working on the same kinds of problems. It's when you're working on something that you care so much about, it's not hard to work on it. But I probably as well would be reading even more. It's really bad.
All right, so there's actually something that I always wondered about startup founders. So a lot of startup founders, they're like, okay, well, to make it successful, I have to put 100% of my time and energy into making this startup successful. So in this case, because this is something that you really believe in, do you feel that's the case? Or have you tried to spend some time to maybe like unplug and spend some time for, you mentioned the woodlands, for your personal side, your mental health, or just in general to unplug?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I strongly don't believe that in order for you to succeed, you have to pour yourself completely into your startup. And in fact, I think it's really detrimental to your startup. And my co-founder, Kate, she would say the same thing. She built a startup, I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago, and built it up to a good size, and then just massively burnt out so completely that she couldn't even look at the business anymore. And so when she did this one with me, she said, I'm not going to do that again. And I had learned similarly. I think, especially as Americans, we tie our self-value so closely to our productivity. When we pour all of that and all of those hopes and dreams for the startup into it, and I think it just leads to such an unsustainable way of motivating yourself. So no, I try very hard not to work all the time and not to tie my identity so closely to my company.
And that actually, I have this question for later down the line, but it's very relevant to this, is that like, since Valla is very focused on like any workplace related issues for the legal way of it. So how do you actually ensure that the workplace environment at Valla actually is in line with that as well?
Oh, I'm so glad you've asked that, because we think a lot about this, right? Like you can't run the kind of company we run and be bad at that stuff. So we've thought about this from the very beginning, and one of our advisors, her name's Alani Buchan, she has this phrase called "build a better unicorn," and that's really what we believe that is possible, which some people I don't think do believe is possible, but we really think it's possible, and we think it's not just possible but urgently required in order to actually succeed. So I'll give you some examples. So we focus a lot on representation at every level of the company. So it's not just making sure that our hiring practices are as kind of inclusive as possible, but also who invests in us. So our cap table, for example, our investors are 72% women and 33% people of color, because to us, we can't succeed as a company unless we are representing the people that we're trying to work with and support at every level. So we care a lot about inclusivity. We also care a lot about this concept of psychological safety.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's just so important for building a unit of people who can innovate their way through uncertainty and risk, which is, you know, what all a startup is. And without that psychological safety, you might be able to make some progress, but it's going to be hell for the team. And, you know, for us, trying to build that into, you know, like how we communicate, how we onboard, how we manage one-to-ones with our employees, you know, our code of conduct as a company, we try and kind of weave that through everything as we're scaling and growing. And Kate and I both have a lot of experience scaling teams up. So we've made some mistakes in the past, we've seen mistakes, and now we're trying to do it better.
All right. Well, we jumped the gun a little bit, but can you actually tell me a little bit about Valla? How the story of how it came to be, what exactly is the mission, and what's the goal for the future?
Absolutely. So Valla is a platform that helps people represent themselves in legal situations. You could call us DIY law. Some people call us IKEA for law. The analogy being that if you can afford to get someone to come and build you like a beautiful kitchen, you should pay for that person to do it. They'll do a great job. If you can afford a lawyer, go and do that. But if you can't, we're here, just like IKEA. You can do it yourself, but we give you all the kits and the instructions and everything like that. And we're starting with employment issues. And we're starting in the UK, but as you've heard, I'm American. We really want to support Americans as well. So if you go to valla.law, you can join the wait list for the US side as well. And the idea is that you can collect all of the evidence, get all of the receipts tidy, build a timeline out of what's happened. And then when you decide to take action, you can actually generate the documents that you need and also understand the strategy.
Okay.
How do I engage with my employer? And then you just walk your way through step by step the process until it gets resolved. So until you reach a settlement with your employer, or you know, you get the promotion that they unfairly denied you because you were on maternity leave, or you know, whatever it is. Yeah, so that's where we are today. Tomorrow is going even further than employment. What we really want to be is the place where anyone who can't afford a lawyer, and that's most people, that's almost everyone, anyone who can't afford a lawyer can resolve any kind of difficult legal situation themselves. So we don't just want to take on bad bosses, but also bad landlords, difficult family cases, immigration issues. So eventually, in, you know, the next few years, we'll be expanding out of just employment. But for now, the reason it exists is because Kate and I, we were women in tech. And when we got more senior as women in tech, we became much more rare in the leadership teams that we were in. Kate especially, she's also from Hong Kong. And we started to see a lot of problems and experience them ourselves. You know, people would come to us with these terrible stories, asking for help and support, and we do our best, but I was just so conscious that my best wasn't good enough. And then we dealt with some issues as well. And to be honest, we just got really pissed off about it. And we thought, God, this is not okay. Why is this so difficult for everyone? How is anyone managing this? And it got us angry enough that we started digging into the industry and trying to understand what was wrong. And that's when we realized there was this massive gap where just most people can't afford representation, and they can't represent themselves very easily because nobody's built anything to help them. So that's why Valla exists. We're here to help people do that.
Amazing. And I was actually kind of curious about, like, where does Valla fall in the journey of, let's say, someone who's having that kind of issue? Would they first talk to HR and then HR is like, no, this is not a problem? Or this is when it gets like maybe blown out of proportion, where maybe they're like, oh yeah, this is not a problem, and then done. That's how it ends up. And then that's where you have to call a lawyer, or vice versa. Maybe that it does end up getting into some kind of lawsuit or issue, and then now you have to get a lawyer, but you don't have the money or you don't have the resources to lawyer up. Where would Valla fit in this situation?
Yeah, great question. Right from the beginning, so with our user research, we've spoken to hundreds of people now who've been in these kinds of problems, and we've identified 3 key phases that people go through with an employment issue. We call the first phase the "is this legal" phase, because people are often asking themselves that question, is that legal? Can they do that? And often people are in a lot of self-doubt in that phase. They're questioning themselves. They're saying, oh, I'm probably making a big deal out of this. I shouldn't rock the boat. I'm a troublemaker. And often the job that they need done for them is twofold. They need their problem labeled for them. So I was bullied in the workplace in the past, and I didn't know that it was bullying for the first year that it was happening to me. And it was only after I realized what that was that I could then do something about it. So it's very powerful to actually be able to label that. And they also need validation. They need to know that this is actually wrong. It's sometimes illegal, and that they can do something about it. And they're not making it up. They're not just imagining things. They're not making a fuss. And so what we do at that stage is a few different things. We have some free guidance. We have an action toolkit that essentially helps people understand how to label their problem. But we knew that that wasn't good enough, because most people stop at that stage. They end up kind of burning out and quitting, and they can carry a lot of shame and trauma with them into other jobs, because it's never a good situation. So we created this thing called discrimination first aid. This idea that there are first aiders who can get trained in discrimination law and how to help someone kind of work through those options, how to talk to HR, how to escalate only when you need to escalate, how to avoid it getting legal but still get what you want, all that kind of stuff. So we're training people to be in the workplace as better allies to people who are discriminated against. That way, if something happens, that first aider could either recognize it and ask if they could help, or they know that they could go to that first aider and offer some help. So that's the first stage. The second stage is the what are my options stage. That's where the Valla platform comes in. If they want to talk to HR, how do I say the right thing to HR? How do I show them I mean business? How do I look professional? That's a lot of what we do on the platform. We give guidance and the professional looking documents, the letter that really makes the point clearly. And we walk people through the process of if they don't want to do this, this is the next step that you could take. Here's how you could escalate it, put some more pressure on them. And then if they still don't resolve the issue, then you move into the third phase, which is get justice. And that's when you do decide that you're going to make it more legal. You're going to, here in the UK, take it to employment tribunal. In the US, get a lawyer involved. And often tons and tons of people never make it to that stage. But what we think is so important is that they know that they could, and they feel confident that they could, because it puts them in so much better of a negotiating position when they're dealing with their employer in those earlier stages.
I can find this so helpful for a lot of women in tech, or even just not even in tech, just any area where there's discrimination or prejudice, and even honestly, not even just that, just like people of color, disabilities, all these kind of backgrounds. I just feel like a lot of people are just like, oh, I guess this is what comes with being the person that I am, but you don't have to. You can take a stand for it. And that's what I like about the mission. One thing I'm just like, how exactly do you guys make money then?
Yeah, great question. Yeah,
because what's the monetization strategy?
Yeah, great question. We are a profit with purpose company, and we have venture capital investors, and we are very much a revenue generating kind of profit focused business. And the way that this is a very good question, because Kate and I spent a lot of time as we were planning out Valla, throwing away commercial models that didn't align at scale with our social impact goals, because it could very easily become weaponized, what we're building. And so there were a lot of different ways that we could have made money, that we kind of played this game of, let's fast forward a few years in the future. There's a product manager who wants to make their bonus inside giant Valla. How did they make that bonus, and is it going to actually help people, or is it going to harm people? And if the product manager in the future harmed people, then we would just chuck out that model and try another one. And where we got to was this idea of pay as you go for the documents that you need. So if you just need to file a grievance at the first stage, then you can use all the evidence collection and stuff like that for free, get your story straight for free, and then you pay to unlock the documents and the guidance that you need to take that step. And then if you need to take the next step, you pay to unlock that document and guidance. Overall, I'll talk in pounds because that's where we're focused right now, but instead of spending like £5,000 on a lawyer, you might spend up to £500.
Yeah.
Which is still, you know, because there are millions of consumers, unfortunately, who face these problems, it still makes a massive market for a business like ours. But the product for them is just so much more affordable, so much more accessible. And so, yeah, we focused a lot on how do we deliver this value at a price that people can actually afford. And still you can build, you know, a better unicorn. You can build a $1 billion business off the back of that, because unfortunately, legal problems are not going to go away anytime soon. Although we do hope that we're going to create a lot more accountability for employers by helping people, you know, stand up to them.
I love that monetization strategy, just because like one of the things that I want to do down the line for myself is like have some kind of B Corp or some social enterprise. But I'm always wondering, like, how do you even monetize that? How do you make it seem like you're not really, here's a great purpose, here's a great mission, but then I'm going to take your money for it. Like, how do you make that balance? Because at the same time, you have to still satisfy your investors and be able to grow and reinvest. But I like that you really still provide almost like a freemium, like you provide it in the very beginning all for free up to a certain point, and then when you actually need to take action, then you'd have the paid model for that.
That's exactly it. Yeah, a very closely aligned commercial model and values. Yeah, it is possible.
All right, so I do have a few other workplace related questions, and it seems like you and Kate had experience with that. So unfortunately, and I guess fortunate too, for this content, could you tell me a little bit about like the experience that you've had, since a lot of the people listening to this are in tech, maybe even women in tech particularly. What was your experience, and even some advice you have for other women in tech?
Yeah, I could talk about all kinds of different experiences, to be honest. I mean, I don't know about everyone else, but usually the flashpoints are often things like the Christmas party, things with alcohol involved. I've been groped on the dance floor by a senior executive in my company and kind of laughed it off, and then later thought that wasn't okay. I've definitely had the you're not the real developer in the team because you're the only woman in the team, you know, treating me that way. Earlier on in my career, I've gone through what I think I've been the only senior woman in a team, and been told that I would just handle the people stuff rather than any of the tough commercial stuff, because I just wasn't commercial enough, which was such a gendered way of looking at the world. And I've dealt with bullying at work, where I don't think that was related to discrimination per se, but it was absolutely awful. I've been through that really subtle kind of bullying that, you know, you don't actually know what's wrong. You just know that your heart rate accelerates when you see one person's name in your diary, in the calendar, and you're just like, oh no. So Kate, obviously, she's had to deal with microaggressions upon microaggressions as a Chinese woman. It's it's been eye-opening, even for me as someone who understands those things, to work more closely with her and hear more of those specific stories about what she deals with. Lots of, unfortunately, quite a wide breadth of experience, and I would say, you know, my career hasn't been killed by it, but I have met a lot of women through the course of working at Valla where their careers were threatened to be killed by it. And that's what really pisses me off. That's what I really am trying to stop, because, you know, a lot of women leave tech because they're just like, this absolutely isn't worth it. And I don't blame them. It often isn't worth it. In terms of advice, there's a few things. One is band together. Absolutely. You know, we've heard those stories about women who amplify each other in meetings, or they enlist allies to amplify their voice to make sure that they're actually getting the credit for the idea or for the project work that they actually did. I think I've found that creating a little internal community and internal networking in general when you're in a, you know, a medium-sized to larger organization really pays off, especially as a woman, because you start to get more recognition for your work rather than the kind of official lines being reported. So definitely banding together. I wish everybody knew what their rights were, because they're trampled over so many times, and the more people know what their rights are, the more they can negotiate from a place of strength and confidence, rather than feel as if they have no other choice, they're trapped, they just have to go along with something. And that can have, like, I'll give you an example. I'm not a software developer anymore because I had a bad team. Like, I didn't want to work in that team anymore. And so I liked the marketing team better. I had done a lot of like blogging in my spare time. I built this successful blog right at the beginning of the whole kind of blogging era, because I'm in my 40s now, so I kind of saw that happen. And I was just like, well, I can be their webmaster from the marketing team. I don't have to do that from the software development team. So then suddenly I was in the marketing team, and within a couple of years I was a marketer. And, you know, I didn't think about it at the time that I was leaving software development. I still did some coding here and there and stuff like that. But, you know, within a few years, I wasn't cutting code anymore. And now, I mean, God forbid I actually try and write an application. I'm sure I could get back into it, but I'm not a software developer anymore because I was a woman in the wrong place at the wrong time. And luckily, my career was okay as a result of it. But I've talked to a lot of women who weren't. So knowing what your rights are, knowing to fight back. And the other thing is, when you do that internal networking, tell people what you earn. That's my number one tip. People share your salary with each other. talk to men, talk to allies, ask them what they earn. Use them to get what you actually deserve. And be confident, ask what you actually deserve, and ask for that. Because the reason I'm so passionate about that is because, especially early on in your career, that has a massive effect on your earnings for the rest of your life. Especially earlier in your career, if you find out that you're being underpaid by $5,000-$10,000 or something like that, that will have knock-on effects for so long. It's worth making the uncomfortable conversation, talking to people, pushing your boss, trying to get that equal pay, because it's so important.
I'm seeing that come up as a big thing as well too, just like all these new apps too, Fishbowl and Blind and Candor. They're just, even Levels FII, they're all opening up like, here's the salaries that and compensation packages that people are getting at this level and this years of experience. So I can definitely tell this is the age where the employees are finally taking a stand. They're trying to work together to make sure everyone's well compensated and well treated in the work environment.
Absolutely. And men have been doing it for years. Like, I'm in Slack channels where one of my friends, a guy who's was just moving back to America, and so he was interviewing at a bunch of FANGs and a bunch of other companies as a software developer. And when he finally got his job, he posted all the different offers he had and the compensation packages against each one to help the other developers in that Slack channel, which was a group of men and women. But I was looking at that and I was thinking, oh my God, how many of these conversations are happening behind closed doors that people just don't get access to because they don't have the networks yet, and all that kind of stuff. So pass that along to, when you get a job, pass it along to other people and say, here were the 2 offers I got, and, help people negotiate those offers.
So one of the questions that I had was, how do you think the future of employment will look like in the next 10 years? And we already talked about that there's going to be a lot of power in employees to know about their rights, know about the pay that's out there as well. And not to mention the pandemic definitely threw a wrench into things as well. So I'm kind of curious about like what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, because I think there's the shifts that are happening because of remote working. And this this massive, interesting war that's going on between employers and employees right now, where the employers are saying, okay, it's time to come back. It's time to go back to the old way. And employees are like, not in this economy, dude. Like, we don't have to do that. And I love the power shift that has happened in, so many labor markets, the US, the UK, Europe, where the employees suddenly, they can command so much more power in pay negotiations, in actually just taking a job. You see these like histrionic posts from Forbes now where it's like, oh no, employees are accepting a job and then ghosting on the first day. Isn't it horrible? And I'm like, how many times have we been ghosted by employers? Nobody was writing like lamentations on Forbes about that. So I think there's this like awakening of the power of the workforce across countries. So you can really see it on like the anti-work Reddit, for example. And so I think that awakening is going to have some really interesting implications for what it means to be a good employer. And I think in general, it should improve to some degree the conditions that people have. I would expect that in America, especially, they're going to have to stop being such absolute jerks when it comes to like I know tech is pretty good, but everyday employers, they can't get away with the same wages, they can't get away with the same terrible management, they can't get away with treating people as disposable. And this war that's happening at the moment is that readjustment where employers are like, wait, we can't treat you like just disposable items anymore. What's happening? And when that settles, I think the implication of that will be better conditions for all workers, not just us living in our tech bubble. But the remote work, I think, will be super fascinating because it will eventually level out salaries across different geographic areas. And what I don't know, and I think is going to be fascinating, is what the implication of international labor markets entering probably into traditional kind of closed, Western markets. Will that overall lower all the salaries because the talent could be available anywhere, or will it raise wages outside of the US, the UK, into some of these other markets that, where if you look at some Eastern European countries and places like that where there's fantastic engineers. I think half of Twitter is like Estonian, for example. There's amazing engineers and amazing maths programs and things like that in different countries where getting access to that talent, I think, will be super interesting. But yeah, in general, I'm very enthusiastic. I'm very optimistic about the power that people are starting to recognize that they have as employees, not just with pay, but with everything in terms of their conditions at work. And even as an employer, I want to be challenged. I want to be held accountable for my responsibility to other people. And I hope it means a lot less crappy employers.
I'm very optimistic about the future as well. There's just like so many new programs and applications that are out there for the worker, not exactly for the employer, such as Valla. And actually, speaking of that, I was kind of curious about this because you and Kate are both women and you guys are founders. So of course you probably had to deal with a lot of issues as being a female founder or an entrepreneur. So one of the questions that I had was like, there's definitely not a lot of women that are, well, actually, I think there's just a lot less female founded startups that are being invested in. And yet you also mentioned you have like 72% of your investors are female. So how did you even find that niche or that niche of really tapping into that spot?
Yeah, I think for companies like ours, where both founders are women, I think it's about 2% of investment capital goes to companies like ours. So we knew that the odds were stacked against us right from the beginning. And that has a couple of implications for running a fundraising process. One is one that anyone will recognize who has dealt with marginalization, is that you have to work twice as hard to get half as much. So running an investment process, you have to run it a very tight Like I'm opening up my seed round right now, and I have a target list of over 80 contacts that I'll be targeting. It'll probably grow up to about 100, 120 by the time I finish. I probably had about 45 or 55 meetings for our pre-seed round before we put together that round. So you work harder, and networking, I knew that networking was going to be absolutely essential because the odds were stacked against us as well. We weren't going to be able to kind of just waltz in cold emails, anything like that. It had to be warm introductions. We had to have the benefit of the doubt before they even met us. And so I spent a lot of time networking before we raised the round and networking during that round to really lean on friends that we had and contacts that we had for introductions. And in terms of reaching women, one, I knew, and Kate knew, that they would understand what we were doing more than anyone. And every woman that I've talked to about Valla says, either recognizes the situations that we've been in, or often says, I wish I'd known about you beforehand, or says, you know, God, I wish I'd been able to send you to this friend or something like that. They all have a story. They all have a story, which is horrifying, but kind of where we are. So they relate to the problems so clearly. Then the question was, how do you find them? And luckily, there are quite a few angel networks now that focus on women and are female founded. So I found those really early on. The first investor I ever contacted was the lead of a female-led angel network. Started to build relationships with them really early on. And then the other thing that I've done that Kate and I really focus on is we try to bring in, when you get an advisor, you know, you need someone to help you, like a legal expert, you need someone to help you with this or that. We try and make sure that the people that we hire are women or people from other marginalized backgrounds, disabilities, you know, experts who are Black, all kinds of things like that. And what we didn't expect then was, we just wanted that perspective to make sure that we were kind of rounding out our perspectives for building the tool. But some of them have now joined as angels because they've gotten excited about what we were doing and they identified so closely with the problem. So yeah, that's how we've kind of built a pretty inclusive cap table. I think I've got a lot more work to do, but yeah. So yeah, work twice as hard for half as much and network like it's your job because it's really your only job.
Speaking of that, so for a lot of women plan on getting married or having children or just having some kind of other personal life beyond a career. So being a female-founded startup, how have you found balancing those kind of things, if you were even planning on doing that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't really talked about this with anyone, but one of the conversations that we had really early on was, what do we want to do? Do either of us want to have children? And what do we want to do to kind of manage that? And we agreed before we actually started the company, yes, we should absolutely support each other in doing that if we want to do that. And here are some of the things that we might do to plan around that. And we thought about other women that we knew who had fundraised while pregnant or built their business, you know, during the early years of their child's life and things like that. And so I've seen it done, and I've seen it done really well. So I would say we felt confident in the abstract and weren't sure yet about the reality, if that makes sense. So yeah, I absolutely think it's doable. And you hear the stories so much, and I've seen some women do it here, which is just so exciting. It hasn't been a thing that we're dealing with yet, but I actually think it's really interesting because we are a completely remote company. We don't have any offices, like many companies now. And we also have employed people with specific disabilities, different compensations that we needed to make in terms of scheduling, or people with family commitments and things like that. And what we try and do is we try to lean into the changes that those adjustments mean for us as a business, and then think about, okay, well, it's actually a really good thing when someone's off on a particular day, because it means that we need to over communicate to make sure that the rest of the team is caught up on what they're doing. And I think we would treat maternity or something like that in the same way, where we would want to make sure that it's not seen or perceived by the business as something that we have to compensate for, but more lean into. Like, of course it's difficult, especially if one of the founders, goes on maternity leave for a long amount of time. But that also can be an opportunity to get a different perspective. Like, it doesn't have to be a terrible thing. I had 6 weeks in America last year providing end-of-life care for my grandmother. She was dying of cancer. And so I went home to America for 6 weeks and worked for most of them from my grandmother's house, whilst she slowly deteriorated over the 6 weeks time to the point where it was 24-hour care. My mother and I were taking shifts, 12-hour shifts at a time, being awake to kind of make sure that she was being looked after. And we got through it. Like, Kate held the fort. I did everything that I could do. Before I left early to make sure that we were settled in before, it all started to get too bad. We decided which work I was going to focus on and which work I wasn't going to focus on. The team all really kind of rallied around me to kind of support me through it. Kate was absolutely incredible through the whole time. And so it is absolutely possible to have a life while still doing this. And it's a little bit harder as a woman because society expects you to do more, like travel to America and provide end-of-life care for your family member. But honestly, it was an honor to be able to do it. And I want everyone to have that opportunity to be able to dedicate that much time to someone that they love, whether it's a child, a family member, whatever that is.
Yeah, I'm great that worked out for you. I always talk to a lot of my friends that are female, and even some of them, I was just like asking about them about like, oh, do you plan on having children? And the first thing they said was like, well, children is going to be basically the death to my career. So they're like even thinking about, do I need to get a surrogate? So that way I don't have to put my career on stop. And it's just something that I feel like a lot of people don't realize women have to constantly think about, especially women in tech. The moment you leave, you could be obsolete in whatever you're trying to do, or make it way harder for you to get into the workforce. But there's just so many issues out there. And I'm glad that Valla exists for preventing these kind of things from happening. And I guess, like, speaking of that, like, do you have any other advice for women in the workplace? Any other advice?
Oh, goodness. Where to start? Don't give away your power. And it's really easy to do. But I think when I look back at my own career, I think often I gave away my power too early. And I think it's easy to do, but it's useful to hear that reminder. Another thing that I focused on a lot, so the very beginning, the first half of my career was pretty accidental. Like, I've told you how I stopped becoming a developer without even realizing it and things like that. The second half of my career so far has been very deliberate. So I heard this other amazing woman in tech, Maria Gutierrez. She now works at Twitter as a VP of engineering. She gave a talk at this Women in Tech event about how she deliberately planned each step of her career. She kind of set a goal, and then she said, okay, well, what skills and experience do I need to kind of get to that goal? And I knew about 5 years before I became a CEO that I wanted to run a company as a CEO. Yep. And I did that exercise as Maria had kind of laid out. And I said, okay, well, to credibly be a CEO, I need to have budget experience. I need to have experience working with the board. I need to run as part of an executive team. And so I basically said, okay, well, I think it'll probably take 2 hops to get me there, or something like that. Then when you're evaluating a job, when you're evaluating whether or not you want to stay in a job that you already have, you've got these boxes that you can check and say, well, is it going to give me experience working with the board? Is it going to give me, whatever that criteria is that you want? And it makes deciding whether or not you should stay in a current role much easier. And it makes it much easier to choose the next job that you might want to take. And that just completely transformed my career, listening to that one talk from Maria kind of give me permission to think about my career that way. So I'd love to, pass that along to all of your listeners.
Yeah, that's actually something that I always like to share with other people is like be intentional with your career. Don't let the career take over you, because then you're going to go into a lot of different areas of burnout potentially, where you're doing something that you don't care for. You're working these many hours and getting paid so little to do something that you don't really care for, has no real value other than maybe like providing food on the table. So that's just like what I've also been saying, and I think it's really valuable advice.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. So, what is on the horizon for you in 2022? Almost half of the year is over, but I'm kind of curious. Startups go really fast. So, what is on the horizon for you or for Valla?
Yeah, so right now I'm fundraising. So I'm talking to a bunch of different investors, really just got started. So in first and second meetings, doing lots of pitches, a lot of work built up to this point, a lot of preparing the materials, doing all the financial models and things. So closing that round would be the first big goal for 2022. The in terms of Valla itself, there's a couple of things that we really want to achieve. We only just launched those letters that I told you about that people can use to kind of move through stages. So I really want by the end of the year, I want those letters to be getting so many results in real workplaces. We've already had people settling with their employer using Valla. We already have success stories, but I want so many more of those success stories, and I want to hear about them, and I want to be able to feed back some of those learnings from people to the next generation of people who are using the platforms and the letters and everything. And I really want to expand discrimination first aid first before the platform to the US, because I think there's just so much that we can do with that training. I think so many people want to be better allies at work, and because of all the work that Kate and I have done, and because of all these people that we've spoken to, we have a very unique perspective on how to help people like go beyond just being aware of the problem with traditional DEI training, but actually put some real teeth behind it. Like we talk a lot about other things are the carrot, but we're definitely the stick.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure that discrimination first aid is out there in another country, and that people are able to do that. So those are probably my top 3 big goals for this year. And I want to get a camping area built in my woodlands so that I can go and camp out in the stars.
So, how could someone get started with Valla?
Absolutely. If you're in the UK, you go to valla.uk and you can sign up for free. It's VALLA. I named it that because of this idea of values-based law. So valla.uk, you can get started, you can create an account for free, collect your evidence, build your timeline, decide what you do from there. If you're in any other country, go to valla.law and you can join our waitlist, tell us where you are, and we will use that to help inform where we go next. And you'll also learn about discrimination first aid there if you want to join the waitlist for the US version, which I do want to come out with this year, or if you want to try out the UK version. So yeah, that's how you get started.
Amazing. And how can we find you or Valla on social media?
Oh yes, so you can find me. Luckily I have a unique enough name that my name is everywhere. It's just Danae Shell, so Danae Shell. I'm that on Twitter, I'm that on LinkedIn, I'm that on every channel. So you can find me really easily. Valla on Twitter is Valla_UK. And if you just search for Valla on LinkedIn, you'll find us there as well.
All right. And lastly, what can we do to support you, either as like maybe a potential intern or employee, or as someone who wants to potentially invest in Valla?
Oh my goodness, yes. So in terms of employee or intern or things like that, right now, we're looking for some people to help us out with social media. And we have so much that we've all of the discrimination first aid content, all of this learning that we've got, and I just want to get it out there, and I don't have enough time to sit down and edit TikTok videos and things like that. So if anybody wants to, if anybody is like a real TikTok expert, I am a massive TikTok fan. I just haven't produced a lot for it. I'd love to talk to you. And if people are interested in investing, definitely drop me an email. Drop me a LinkedIn message. I'm Danae at valla.uk. And also email me that, send me that email address, send an email to that address as well if you just have a question or you have a problem and you want to talk to somebody, because you know, I've been there. I felt like I was really alone in an issue, and I don't want anyone to ever feel that way. So me or someone on the team will do what we can to help. But yeah, absolutely, any incoming queries on investment, we will eventually do a crowdfunding round. But in the meantime, definitely keen to talk to angel investors and VCs and any corporate funds or, you know, legal companies that want to get some amazing credibility in their access to justice and pro bono space. You could not find a better place to work with than what we're doing.
And you actually brought something up that I'm kind of curious if Valla has this down the line, but a community. If, let's say, for example, someone wants to maybe even talk in a very, almost like blind and fishbowl, but very targeted to this particular area, is that something that's down the line or even a consideration?
Absolutely. One of the first things that Kate and I built when we've always understood the problem, but it took us ages to figure out what to build to actually start to solve the problem. And one of the first things that we built was a story site where people could share what happened to them with a twofold purpose. One is when you're dealing with a traumatic situation, giving the story a beginning, a middle, and an end can often help you process what's happened to you, because it just bounces around in your head otherwise. It's a fragmented memory rather than a nice tidy story. So actually documenting that can be very useful for you, but then also it helps other people recognize what is happening to them, especially if they're in that is this legal phase. And I really want to bring that back. Kate and I really loved it, but we couldn't. We started it too early, and we're trying to figure out how to bring those stories back, because we think they're so powerful. And we might pop that onto Valla.law so that people can say, you know, I want to submit a story. But absolutely, yes, a community. Discrimination first aiders is our first community, the people who complete the course and then can talk to each other about, I've got this kind of situation, how do I support someone? But there's so many people who have gone through this and never want someone else to have to deal with it. And we want to hear from them. We want to try and find a way to connect them with other people. We're thinking about mentor or buddy programs for people who are peer support, for people who are going through it right now and people who have gone through it before. So yeah, if anyone wants to talk to me about that, I am so excited to talk about that, because it's just, I want to help people process emotionally what has happened to them, as well as the legal problems alongside it, because that's how you really help someone move on and thrive in the rest of their lives and their career.
Thank you so much for what you're doing. I'm very excited for when Valla officially comes out to the US. So definitely follow Valla and follow Danae on the social media accounts down below. And also thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Christine. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.